And so I just want to, again, and Ebeneezer, I don't want to mess up your last name. And so if you could say your last name for us. Oh, is it on? There we go.
Talking about my last name, I was asked to speak for 5 minutes, which Pastor Kathy, I think is public speaking suicide. To ask a pastor, a lawyer from Africa, to talk for 5 minutes about himself, that is public speaking suicide, because it takes about 15 to 30 minutes just to teach you my last name. My last name is pronounced Appiagyei. Appiagyei.
Appiagyei.
Trust me, you will forget in the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, you can just keep that. Thank you, Pastor Ebeneezer. And so we're so grateful to have you both here. And we have several immigration questions. And if I may take a little liberty, I wanted to just share, as Karen was talking about the invasion of Christopher Columbus, this is the Christopher Columbus lesson I give my children. And I talk to them about the Taino Indians that inhabited the Caribbean islands. So in 1492, when Columbus invaded, there were approximately 500,000 to 1 million Tainos. We're not sure because there's no record. About 10 years later, in 1502, the first slaves arrived on the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and Dominican Republic. 10 years later, because there weren't enough Indians to do the work that the Spaniards and others wanted. 17 years later after that, there were only approximately 30,000 Taino Indians on the island. And 29 years later, in 1548, fewer than 500 Taino Indians were inhabited Hispaniola. So if my brother did one of those 23andMe tests, and I have like 1% Native American, and also 1% Jewish. So the equivalent of Jewish heritage is the same for me as it is for Native American, because there just wasn't any. So when we talk about these things, when you look at the actual numbers of one country, that's just Dominican Republic, and this is just estimates because there's no records and we don't know, because we didn't write the history, someone else did. We have to put it in context of what that means for the peoples that are there. So, in light of that, thank you. Ebeneezer, did you want to talk a little bit about yourself and what your work is now?
Yes. So once again, my name is Ebeneezer Appiagyei. I would like to reintroduce myself to the Justice Network. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa, sit on the Gulf of Guinea, border Togo, and Ivory Coast. I came to United States in 1998. When I was coming to United States, my parents were alive then. I came through a student's program. I had just graduated from college in 1998. I think I'm dating myself too. And my father and my mother both gave me advice when I was coming to this country. And it's interesting, both have a different perspective about America. My mother gave me a text in, I think, Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7, something like that, about speak about the goodness of the land on which you are going. Speak and pray for its prosperity, for it will be your prosperity. My father, on the other hand, told me the discrimination, the marginalization, and the things I will face in America. So I was coming to a country I've never been before, but I've heard the things about it. But I was supposed to hold what my mother said and my father said, what we call creative tension. I'm supposed to pray for a nation that's going to marginalize me, but I need to pray for its prosperity for me to be able to prosper. It was tough. My first culture shock was when a young kid, and let me use this term, a young white kid saw me at the airport and asked me, do Africans live on trees? Because my grandmother is a missionary. in Togo, and she told, my father told me, so the grandmother didn't say that, but the father of the kid told the kid, Africans live a tree, because this kid wanted to go to Africa with the grandmother, and the father don't want this kid to go. So this is how he was educating the kid. And let me tell you, one thing you don't know about immigrants that we have in common, we have a sense of sarcasm. Immigrants are very, just generalizing, very sarcastic, but you might not know because sometimes the accent don't let you understand what we're saying. And I said, I think for a minute, by the way, don't take my ordination license from me. Before I became a pastor, I thought for a minute, and I said, yeah, we do. As a matter of fact, I used to sit on the tallest. But guess what? Your grandmother, because she's a missionary, she can climb too. But your father, if she comes, he can't climb. So you know what happens when people sit at the top and people live in the bottom. You know the rest, just your imagination. Then the kid began to cry. Then the father, we are on the carousel, you know. The father came to me, why would you say that to a kid? And the mother, you know, that is why I love women pastors. I'm telling you, the mother came to my defense, and the mother said, that is what you taught your child, and he did nothing. He just affirming what you want your child to know. Now I've stopped those kind of sarcasm because Christ has liberated me, and now I'm an ordained elder of the Free Methodists. I can't be speaking like that in public anymore. But the mother came to my defense. When I came to United States, see, I was a graduate from a university. Contrary to the myth that immigrants are uneducated, they come here, they don't contribute to anything in America, it's not true. Most, and I'm just pardon me if I make too much generalization, most immigrants that come to the United States, whether they come through the border, or they come by air, or they come by boat, are highly educated. But this is what my father always used to say. Injustice flourishes in the land of ignorance. Ignorance is what makes us think, we make this so much political and polarization that we think the moment you see an immigrant and the moment the person speaks with an accent, they are not intelligent enough. What you have to understand, when you are raised in a different environment, you're going to have a different accent. When you come to Ghana, we think you have a different accent. And when I came here, I came as I had a law background in Ghana. I came as a law student, but then it didn't work out the way I planned it because the government of Ghana decided not to sponsor lawyers because they make too much problems in the country. They would rather use it for STEM. Anybody know about STEM? Everybody's going that direction. How many minutes do I have? You have to time me.
Do you want me to cut you off? You have 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. So I decided to go to seminary. I went to seminary and I joined the Free Methodists 2005 in Ohio conference. Yes.
OH.
Yeah.
OH.
I joined Free Methodists in 2005 in Ohio conference. I was an associate minister for Living Hope. At that time was Columbus First. And now we have so many Living and New and Grace. I messed up our names. And I became a senior pastor of New Hope Free Methodist Church. I am a very mysterious person. People still don't know much about me. They try to figure me out, but they can't. This is a guy who was sent to pastor a church. People that don't look like him, don't sound like him, had nothing, not much in common except Jesus' name. When I was sent there, they sent me there as an experiment. I think so. That's what I felt. They were sending me as an experiment. But I was supposed to stay there for a year and decide whether I'm going to stay there. I stayed there for 11 years. 2015, I was crying to God for the growth of the church because we have had a downturn. Things will start going downward. Every pastor understands that. It goes up, you get excited, God is in it, and you go down and you begin to ask, are you really in this? And I saw Exodus 14:14. God said Moses, why are you crying to me? Stretch your staff. I'm telling you why I became a pastor and a lawyer. So don't miss the conversation. And God said, I gave you much more wisdom than just being a pastor. And do not get and misinterpret and do not hear what I'm not saying. God was pleased with the calling as a pastor. But he thought there is more I can do also in the marketplace. So when he says stretch your staff, the first thing came to my mind is I need to go back and pick. And we're doing the times of all the police brutality and all the crazy things that were happening to minority communities. And as I need to pick this up, if I am going to make a difference outside the pulpit, I need to go to law school. I'm telling you, my wife said, this is a midlife crisis. You need to see a counselor. Nobody leave a pastorate and go to law school when you are 42 years old. I already did myself. But God, I did it when I went to law school, talking about immigrants always being marginalized. A professor called me on the side and said, you just woke up and say, I'm coming to law school. I said, why? Because you don't look like law school material. But this is how I motivate myself. When I meet people who try to be condescending and marginalized, that's how I be motivated. I said, you are wrong. And I'm going to make you through first year, second year, and third year. And he said, you can do that, but the bar exams is very difficult. Guess what? 2 years ago, I was on the same panel with this same professor, and she came and apologized. He said, I nearly killed your dream. Please, immigrants, they have purpose. They have aim, they have goal. Nobody walked through that dangerous place because I just want to take a stroll. We don't come here because we want to hike on the border. We come here because we have purpose. When I became a lawyer, the first thing I did was to practice immigration law. But it was in a tumultuous time that was so dangerous. I cried every night to sleep. How my clients were being treated because of the past government. So much lies. 3 of the lies, and I'm going to stop, I promise. This is the shortest I can give you.
I know. I know you're really trying.
This is the shortest I can give. 3 lies. 1, immigrants are uneducated. They are criminals. We heard that narrative in public place. People of God, it's not true. A Christian should never ever say that when you've not met any immigrant at all in your life. Take time to listen. Behind the accent are good heart and good people that we all have the same thing in common. We want the best for our family. And I used to cry myself to sleep because I'm looking at people. All they're looking for is a better place for their family. And guess what? Who messed it up? I can't go into it. I know you were talking about Guatemala. I was there 2007. A lot of this, what we call third world countries, have been destroyed and looted by the Western countries. We are coming here because a lot of things that went on was done by the CIAs and other stuff. There's a whole lot of history out there that nobody wants us to teach it. Nobody wants us to talk about it. We just all have to sit and sing Kumbaya. So we come here not because we don't have any place to go. We come here because you destabilize our system and our way of living. And if you show me movies of a nation that don't have problems, everything is beautiful, I'm coming. And that's why you portray to the world the best place in the world. What do you expect? If it is the best place in the world, that's where we come in. And we come with our cousins and nephews and nieces. I did immigration law. God has used me since the past 5 years. I've been practicing law. I did immigration for 1.5 years. I still do immigration law. But I realized that it was not the purpose for which God was sending me. So I joined the prosecutor's office, the district attorney's office. I became a deputy district attorney in 2021. In 2020. So I've been a prosecutor for 4 years. I am the newest, I believe, Free Methodist elder in the River Conference under the leadership of Dr. and Dr. Right? Yeah, Dr. and Dr. Michael and Emilia Trailer. I am excited. I just moved recently to Colorado. Pray for me. I moved from Ohio to Colorado, so I'm an elder of the Living Tower Free Methodist Church. Everything I said here, listening to me carefully, was not about giving you a legal advice. I have to put that there. Not giving you a legal advice. If you need a legal advice about immigration or anything, try to see an attorney. If you don't have an attorney, I will be around to give free services and free questioning. Thank you.
I can't take. No, you keep it. You keep it, but be careful. Okay. Thank you so much, Ebeneezer. So as we, I know that here a lot of us are like-minded, right? And so we can say things like, one shared experience among many of our countries is the invasion of the U.S. or the helping of the U.S. after some sort of political, or before some sort of political crisis. And so we can say that here. It's a safe place. But how do you begin these conversations? What are some ways that you can start to help others begin this conversation who maybe aren't as open to listening?
You know, it has to come out of a loving place. See, sometimes I make jokes and all that, but the truth be told, like I said, injustice flourishes in the soil of ignorance. And sometimes we that are trying to educate people can also be ignorant. Because I'm ignorant that this individual grew up in a different environment where the father was telling her that Africans live on trees. So I had to be a little bit compassionate and show empathy to educate. Beloved, the only thing we can do to overcome injustices is education. Keep educating. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes you have to repeat yourself. You ever sit in the classroom where the professor don't look at your direction except he's talking about minority or immigrants? You ever had that experience? I sit in the classroom, anything I was like, I'm there to speak for every minority in the world. The professor don't look at my direction and he starts talking about something that has to do with minority. Then he turns there and everybody looking at me. I said, oh, okay. I'm carrying the weight of the world now. I need to behave.
We have to answer for everyone. So the kindness that we would express to others and the curiosity, would it be the same approach for someone who has internalized the oppression?
Yeah, you know, I have a special compassion for people who have internalized the oppression. It's really difficult not to. There's a Costa Rican theologian, his name is Oscar Garcia Johnson, and he says, we have a colonial wound, and instead of healing it, we keep perpetuating it and inflicting it generation after generation. I see this so evidently right now that I'm living in Mexico. So many people, you could have a person who clearly has indigenous roots tell you, oh, I'm not indigenous, I'm European, my family's from Spain. And you know, I have a lot of compassion for people because they've been told everything that's indigenous is low, it's undesirable, it's uneducated, it's not refined. But everything that is European, right, is the opposite of all of that. And so, you know, in situations with people like that, I try to be friends and I try to be a presence because I also know what it's like, movie Get Out, right? They have that sense of like you're kind of underground and you can't can't see things, can't understand the way that things are. And so I do approach those situations with more care and sensitivity because I know they're wounded on top of the fact that, you know, they're expressing these views, right? I don't know if you saw in the news. It made me very sad that one of the leaders of the Proud Boys is an Afro-Cuban man, and his name's Enrique, I think. And he's very clearly Afro-Cuban, and yet he was the leader of this white supremacist group. And I just thought, this is very sad. This man has internalized oppression to the point that he's inflicting it on people that look like him. You know, it looks just like him. And so, yeah, I do pray for people in those situations. Some of them are in my own family. And a lot of that desire, because I see this in the Latino community especially, kind of a desire to be secondary white people. And I saw this in my own family, right? There's a saying in Spanish, mejorar la raza. And it means to improve the race. It's a very harmful racist saying. But, you know, I recognize that my grandmother and my mother and the women who encouraged this in my family, it's not that they wanted to hate themselves. They just looked around at their society and they saw life is easier for people who are whiter. They have better jobs, better opportunities, more education, and that's what they wanted for their children. So it was really survival that pushed them into this desire, right? To push into this kind of white supremacist ideas. And the thing is, I have compassion for that. Also, I have the power to disrupt those systems now. I don't have to keep assimilating to that. So all of us have the power now to disrupt. And I think we can disrupt in ways that are loving, as he was saying, that are kind toward each other especially, right? To people who have internalized this oppression and spout it out. But yeah, it's an issue, and I try to really pray and use a lot more gentleness with people because they're wounded.
I often think about how we could have a complete panel discussion about hair.
Pelo malo.
The pelo bueno, pelo malo, like good hair, bad hair. When I married my husband who's white, many people were like, oh, I hope your kids have his hair. And I'm like, oh, he has no hair, so. But how many people said that to me?
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's so difficult because it extends to all these different levels of things. So there are some people that are here who pastor churches in areas where they are physically disconnected from immigrant populations. You know, we're here in Texas, we're very near it. But some people pastor in places where there isn't a lot of immigrants. How can they become part of the solution? How can they connect with what we're talking about today, being physically removed from those spaces and places and people?
I think you are talking about my experience. Since I've been in the United States, the way I felt my calling was I always see myself as a missionary here. And so I intentionally, not that I don't want to be part of the immigrant community, but intentionally always want to minister to the Americans. Mm-hmm. And what I have found out is, I make clear when I'm in a place where I'm the minority, that I'm not here to speak on behalf of minorities. But then, when there's an ignorant statement made, I make sure that out of kindness, out of love, I correct that. I was on a leadership team. And, you know, the person said he's a kind person, said something that was really, really off. And I nicely said, what you said is the most stereotyped thing I've ever heard, but you don't know you are stereotyping what you just said. But please don't repeat this outside this meeting. And the individual got upset with me and he said, but you say you don't represent. I said, that's not what I meant. What I meant is, I'm not here to speak for everyone. So when you leave, you think everything I said represents everybody that looks like me. That's what I'm trying to correct. But what I want you to understand is this. If you make statements that I feel is stereotype, I need to speak up. And that's exactly what my father taught me when I was coming here. that always speak up. So I do speak up in those environments, and when I get opportunity to talk about, like I'm here talking about my experience, I always do it. And that's what I would tell parents. Stop asking your children, how was school? The response you're going to get is good, especially when your children are found as minority in a school. Don't ask questions, how was school? Good, and just leave it at that. Have a conversation. Let them come up and always affirm your children. I have made clear, my wife and myself made clear that we affirm our children, who they are, where they come from. I said, you belong to this land because you were born here. Never ever let anybody tell you you're not from the United States of America. You are from here because you were born here. And you equally deserve to be on this land and be whatever you want to be. Regardless of your race, your culture. They're always going to define you by where I come from. But always remind them, you from here. So we need to affirm our children. Start talking down on these children, affirm them daily. I do that daily because I know they are hearing stuff sometimes they will repeat to me.
Yeah. I would say, you know, I was at a church in North Carolina in February, and somebody asked me a question in the Q&A. They were saying, how do we reach out to the immigrant community? How do we get them to come to our church? And I just said, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but they don't want to go to church with you. I said, perhaps the second generation. But the first generation, you know, people are struggling to survive often, and they don't speak English. Only 24% of first generation immigrants speak English well. So they need like the safety and comfort of their heart language for church. And church in the Latino community, you know, when I had my quinceañera, because my parents, you know, my dad was a custodian, my mom was a nurse's aide. Even though my dad had been educated in Guatemala, he could never find the equivalency here in the US. When I had my quinceañera, the whole community, there was like a padrino, a sponsor for the photographer, for the dress, for the food. You know, there were some of the comadres got together to cook the food because my parents weren't wealthy and they couldn't afford it. And the way that we did church was very communally. Someone's car broke down, well, someone in the church was a mechanic. They will fix your car. And the next time you need babysitting, you know, they're gonna help you out with that. So the way that often immigrant communities do church is very different. And so it's gonna feel not comfortable to be in a church with white people because, you know, when most people ask me that question, what they're asking for is, how can I get them to come to my church? But the worship and everything's gonna remain the same. They're just gonna be, their butts are gonna be in the chairs, right? So I'm just telling you that that's not gonna happen probably. Now the second generation, this is a place where you can offer a lot of support. In fact, there's a church in Baltimore in the community that I lived in that was Lutheran, historically Lutheran, you know, lots of white people, but the neighborhood around them changed. And now it was mostly a Central American, Salvadoran, Honduran neighborhood. And what they did during the pandemic is they went to their neighbors and said, what can we do to support you? Because they knew that a lot of people in the community were essential workers. So they said, what can we do? We know you don't go to our church, but what can we do to help you? We have a food pantry, all these things. And the family said, no, we don't need your food. Could you allow our children to use your internet for their schooling? You know? And the church said, yeah. So they set up, you know, social distancing desks and tables and all this stuff because that's what the community needed. And you know what? Some of the kids go to the church youth group. The parents still don't. They just still go to Sagrado Corazon Catholic Church, you know, several blocks away because, again, they need the comfort of that. And so I think if your expectation is how can you support the community, that's a different question than how can I get the immigrants to come to my church. I think there's many ways that you can support the community. In every community where there's immigrants, even if they're not terribly close by, there are going to be like resource centers, immigration, legal help. There's going to be all kinds of services for immigrants and their children. In my city, there's like a refugee tutoring because a lot of the parents can't help their kids with homework because guess what? Except for math, all the homework is in another language, right? So there's like a tutoring program. There's also a refugee assistance program through the college to learn English, to learn how to be a nurse's aide. So every community has it. I would connect with the resources that are in the immigrant communities to offer your support there, because you can care for and support immigrant communities without having them in your pews. Sorry, no, it's long.
No, it was beautiful, and I appreciate how you said that, because we are all here interconnected. So we have superintendents here, we have bishops here, and you can say, hey, what immigrant communities are in your region that we can partner with, right? Because there are several people that can help from afar. A story I heard when we moved to New York City, there were people from New Hope in Rochester that would bring clothes to my family because we came in January and had no coats. And so someone who was a bishop who was in the room would bring coats down from New Hope for me, right? But that's how we connect with one another. So we have lots of different ways to connect, especially. And I do want this question too. How do we reconcile? There's a lot of talk about our land, and we defend our land. And then when people read Joshua, for example, and they highlight this in this question, there's a lot of conquest in the book of Joshua. And so how do we reconcile this care for the land with the idea that the land is ours to conquest, because that's what the Lord told Joshua, was to be brave and conquer. And so how do we reconcile that with the conversations that are happening now about conquering this land?
Yeah, that's a great question, whoever asked this. And I actually looked into that. Reading about the flight from Egypt and the conquest of the land is very different when you're a Native American person. So Native American theologians really struggle with that story of Joshua and the conquest of the land, because of course the Israelites were so grateful to find a place of safety and freedom. They didn't even think about the Canaanites, right? Who were completely displaced, right? Murdered, removed from their home. And that's the position from which indigenous people often read that text, right? Which really shows you a lot about your social location, really affects the way you read the Bible. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think it's important also to think about the story of Joshua includes the story of Rahab, right? Who is this foreign prostitute, probably the least desirable person. If you could think of like who our American government is going to let in to our country to be a naturalized citizen, they are not going to choose a foreign prostitute with a history of deceit and trickery and lying, right? And yet this is a person who is welcomed into the community of God and lives with honor in that community. She's not just let in like, hey, come in and you can live in that hut over there. No, she marries in the community. The lineage of the Son of God comes through her, right, from that marriage. And I think it shows you a lot about God's inclusion. Here, she cast her lot with Israel, right? But the blessing for Israel was to be a blessing to all the earth. It wasn't just something they were to hoard for themselves, right? It was to be a blessing for everyone. So I do think we have to read that story a little bit in the context of the larger story being told, and in these smaller stories that we hear. Is the hero of the book of Joshua, is it Joshua, or is it people like Rahab? It just depends on where you're sitting, right? What you're going to see and who you're going to proclaim as the hero of the story. He gets to conquer. She gets to birth the Son of God. It gets to come through her, the salvation of the whole world. So, yeah, I do think it's important to hold that story, but I think we have to look at other stories and how they weigh together and what the blessing of land was for. Sorry.
No, I think you answered it. let us move on.
So when we talk about owning the land and housing, so housing is a big issue, especially like it's cheaper to live here in Texas than in California, as you said earlier. So I'm just going to read it. How in our imagination of God owning the land does housing get built and paid for? The shortage of housing has created wealth for a few and made immigrants more scary because there isn't enough housing already.
For sure. And I worked in refugee resettlement, and I can tell you, even in Texas, it's gotten expensive, right? Our Fort Worth office used to be the only office where housing was affordable, other than Akron, Ohio. That was the only other place where it was affordable. You know, I'm good friends with a woman you might know, Sandra Van Opstal. You know, she wrote a book called The Next Worshipped, and she's a pastor in Chicago. And she and her husband did something really interesting. You know, in Chicago, there's a lot of multifamily homes. So they bought a multifamily home, and then, you know, they live on a floor of it, and they rent the other 2 floors to immigrant communities at very affordable rates. Because, you know, a mortgage is often more affordable than rent, right? That's the irony. They'll tell you you're not approved for a mortgage, but the rent that you pay is higher than you would have paid with the mortgage, which tells you about the system and how, you know, broken it is. And so people in their church community have started to do this, not for their own enrichment, because they're able to afford the mortgage, but they do it to serve the immigrant communities in their neighborhoods so that everyone has a home, right? Nobody has to live in a rat-infested corner because that's all that they can afford. And I thought it was a really beautiful example of the way the community can come together, because as Christians, we're not immune from also hoarding land, from having more than we need, right? I have some good friends in Lancaster, Pennsylvania that have taken in to their very large home a Nicaraguan family who is seeking asylum in the U.S. I think there are ways that we can share what we have, but I think it's going to be costly, and it's going to require, you know, sacrifice on our behalf. For most people in other countries, they're used to a more communal life, you know, so this is not something like foreign. But in the U.S., I think we're used to thinking about land and space. I just saw that, you know, there was a house in the movie The Devil Wears Prada in New York, right, in Manhattan. Somebody just bought it. A single person bought this home that has 7 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms for one person, you know, to live in this place. And I think we have to acknowledge we all often take more than we need when it comes to housing, right? We like big spaces. And so what can we do on a personal level, but also what can we advocate for? There's a lot of communities, you know, I have some friends that live in Oakland, and they say it's really hard when Christians become part of the not in my backyard movement for affordable housing. And they're like, it's really hard when we see people from our own churches become part of, don't build affordable housing here, we don't want apartments here. Apartments is where most people start, you know, and that's what they need. And so I think there are personal solutions that some of us have access to, some of us don't. But I think there are communal solutions as well, where we really have to interrogate our values and what we've been taught about our property and our space.
I think I agree with everything you said. In 2020 to 2023, I was working during the COVID, I have just left my last assignment to take a break. I was working with a different denomination. They are predominantly from West Africa, and they're planting churches like Motion in the United States. And they've started what you were saying. Most of the young men and young women who are not married, they'll buy a home and rent. They'll buy like a 4-bedroom home and rent it out to immigrant family. And at a very affordable rate. I believe if immigrants from West Africa, most of them are not professionals. By professionals, I mean, the traditional names you call them. They are working minimum wage, but they're able to save up and try to help other immigrants. I think the American church can do that.
And for the WHWC Conference 2024, Dr. Sandra Van Opsel is going to be one of the preachers there. So
She's
just
amazing.
a little plug for WHWC next year in Dallas, Texas. And then also Eruca.org, I don't know if Junia is in the room, but Junia Howell spoke last year about housing. So if you want her website, there is a ton of information there too about housing inequality in the U.S., and so you can go there too. I can give you the name later. So in light of some of those resources, what are some national organizations that you would recommend people follow? Because that is a way to inform ourselves and connect, is through the internet. Mm-hmm. And so what are some national organizations that you would encourage people to follow or to be a part of?
Yeah, so I follow, one of the organizations I follow is the American Immigration Council. They are a nonpartisan think tank. So often I'll hear something on the news, and then what I'll do is I'll go to their website to find out if it's true. Because they don't have any political stake. You know, all they're doing is research about immigration in the US. And so I always tell people, when you hear something negative or you see a meme, like I saw this meme flying around during the last election that said something like, illegal refugees, are being allowed in the country. Why doesn't Joe Biden invite them to his house or something? People were sharing this thing on Facebook, and I'm like, first of all, no such thing as an illegal refugee. A refugee, by very definition. Yeah, right. And then the idea that people are being let in, I wish that were true. I mean, yeah, the restrictions are so high. There's so many, and so I just tell people, look, even if it's positive, don't share it if you don't know that it's true, because it doesn't help anyone to spread misinformation. So I love the American Immigration Council, the National Immigration Forum, also very good. Some of the immigration groups that I follow are KIND, which is Kids in Need of Defense. And this is an organization that works with unaccompanied minors, especially for special immigrant juvenile visas. There's also an organization called Al Otro Lado. They're based in San Diego, but I think they have branches other places, and they do a lot of work in the borderlands, especially. And you know what? There's some really great shelters. One of the things that I think is really beautiful about the story of God with God's people is that, you would imagine that all the work is happening in the U.S., but I've actually been to a lot of migrant shelters on the Mexico side. And I was in Tijuana once, and I met this community of pastors got together, and they turned some parts of their church into shelters. They started building housing, encouraging Haitian and encouraging Honduran migrants to stay in Tijuana, because the economy in Tijuana is very strong. There's a lot of jobs because it's in the borderlands. And there's these really great shelters, some I still support and follow, that are very dignifying, that are doing very good work to care for and support people. And so there's a lot of good work that's happening. I think some of it is just connecting and finding out what it is. You will be heartened to know the work that's happening that you don't even know about right now. Like when I went to this, it's called Casa Migrante in Tijuana, I remember thinking they have like art therapy for migrants, because a lot of migrants just can't even express, what they've experienced. But they provide clothing. All the food cannot be processed. All the food is cooked fresh. The place is incredibly clean and organized. Everybody receives medical care. Everybody receives support finding jobs. And there's this huge, huge closet full of clothing. And in fact, when my dad is getting rid of clothing, I send them clothing, because they're always looking for clothing in small sizes, and my dad's like 5 feet tall, But it was so heartening for me to be in this place because all the negative things that you hear, you would think there's nothing good happening and that not a lot of people care. But the more you connect with these organizations, the more you learn about how much work is happening, right? And isn't that the kind of the mystery of faith? You believe in what you don't see, right? And trust in what you don't understand.
And I would recommend Immigration Justice Network. So the reason I also became a prosecutor is so that I will be able to help immigrants on a very subsidized or on a pro bono basis. So I provide pro bono services with Immigration Justice Network to help people with either citizenship or asylum or juvenile, special juveniles. So I recommend that. There's also, I think the United Methodists also have a very robust group about global network. They also work with a lot of immigrants, and me coming to the River Conference, I think it's a conversation I have with my superintendents. I really, really want to get into the border and help people as much as I can. I believe that is part of my calling as a missionary.
Thank you so much. We have a round of applause for
Thank you.
Ebeneezer and Sharon.